Good morning from Bali, Indonesia. Now it's 5:04 a.m. in Bali and it is 5:04 Eastern New York time, I think. And we are here on live podcast for the next 100 days. I will go solo, but also mm, with the guest speakers, our experts will share with us. And then, yes, let's play our sponsor video. Let's open our live podcast while waiting for our guest speaker. They are already in the studio.
Welcome to the Live Podcast. To the Live Podcast, the place where brands transform, dreams become reality, and stories become legends. Get ready to elevate your media. The, the place. Welcome to the Live Podcast, the place where brands transform, dreams become reality, and stories become legends. Get ready to elevate your media branding experience with your host, Anita Sanya, the founder of Live Podcast Media. Let's do this. Welcome to the Live Podcast, the place where brands transform, dreams become reality, and stories become legends. Get ready to elevate your media branding experience with your host, Anita Sanya, the founder of Live Podcast Media. Let's do this. Experience with your host, Anita Sanya, the founder of Live Podcast Media. Let's do this.
Hi, it's Ann Carden here. I'm a top business growth strategist and the founder of the Expert in You programs and brand. And I'm so excited to be a proud sponsor of the 100 Days Live podcast with Anita Sonia. Anita is doing such great work out there, and I can't wait to be part of the 100 Days Live podcast. Anita aligns with what I do in my business to help my clients because I help them really build their influence and step up their game so that they can add that $1 million or even more with ultra high end clients. I would love to invite you to check out one of my programs called Million Dollar Accelerator. It's a mastermind and mentorship program that helps you add that $1 million or even beyond to your business, but do it with high caliber $25,000 to $125,000 plus clients, months, or paydays. So check
All
that
right.
out
It
at
seems that there is a technical
annlcarden.com
stuff
forward
here.
slash mastermind. And if it looks like
Mm.
something that you would like to be part of, then you can apply there. Have an amazing day and don't forget to be part.
Okay. Good morning, gentlemen. How have you been? Thank you so much for being here. It seems that I don't know the Restream Studio. It's been a long time that I don't use Restream, right? But I have already tried it. I don't understand why it's having some errors again today, and I cannot connect to Facebook. So if you want to watch us, please go to the live podcast media on the LinkedIn and also on the YouTube. And we are here with our distinguished guest. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Rob Greenlee, and also Mr. Dave Jackson, our podcast
Glad to
Hall
be here.
Famers. Thank you so much for being here. No matter what, because yes, there are technical stuff here, but I do my best. I have been talking to the live stream,
Welcome to the Live
to the
Podcast,
stream
the
staff
place where brands
yesterday,
transform,
and then also
dreams
until
become
this
reality,
morning.
and
But it seems
stories
that
become legends.
we
Get
cannot,
ready to elevate your media branding
I don't know,
experience
offer
with your
some
host, Anita
technical stuff
Sanya,
here.
the founder
But
of
my
Live Podcast Media.
yep, sorry,
Let's do this.
it is automatically playing in the background like that, but then it's okay because I'm going to record this, right? We are on the recording, so it will be good for the podcast. Lucky the podcast will be edited, right? So it's not live streaming that you can have all of the technical difficulties. Then I still cannot connect to Facebook now, Dave and Rob.
Yeah, that's okay. Just close out on that upper video, and then we can get started. So
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I cannot what is it, hide the video yet. So how have you
yeah,
been? Today we are going to talk about how to have the strategic streaming, because with the strategic streaming we only go live streaming, we only go podcasting without any goals, right? So let's start about it, and we are going to discuss about how to monetize podcasting with Dave today. And then we also talk about trust for the indie podcaster and live streamer, right, Rob?
yeah. If we want to go there and talk about that, yeah, I think it's an important topic these days. Right.
Yes, because there are so many misinformation, or I don't know, different perspective or acceptance from the media today. And then maybe we will go to Dave first about how to monetize the podcast. There are 7 ways that Dave formulate for monetizing the podcast, and I've just started today. This is our first day, so I'm going to edit this. Thank you so much. Welcome to live podcast.
Yeah, happy to be here. I wasn't sure, did you want me to show some slides or did you just want to ask me some questions? I can go either way.
I think it's better for the discussion also with me and Rob, right, Dave, because you are the experts here. Uh, how to call it? Like presentation can be very boring.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I always think is kind of interesting, and I think it's
Mm-hmm,
because
mm-hmm.
many of us grew up with radio, that we think
Yes.
I'll start a podcast and I will get some ads. And there's nothing wrong with advertising, but that's not really the number one way I recommend that people monetize their show. You have to realize the first thing you have to do when you start a podcast is get an audience. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't have an audience, then you shouldn't be talking about how can I monetize this. And a lot of people skip that step too. But the most profitable way to monetize your show is to have a product or service that you can sell
Mm-hmm.
to your audience. So I know there was a podcast all about dog walking, and there was a guy that was his job. He was a dog walker, and he found out the more he met with other dog walkers that there really wasn't any software designed for people who walk dogs for a living. And so he hired some guys and they wrote a software for dog walkers to keep track of your clients and the kind of dogs and things like that. And so his podcast then became profitable because he started promoting a product that he had. I have a product. I run the School of Podcasting. So my show is all about podcasting because you have to figure out what audience would listen to a show that would then start a podcast. So I kind of make that podcast for those people. So I talk about podcasting and how to grow your show. And then somewhere in that, 40 minutes, I'm going to put an ad for my own product. So that's one way that you can make money with your podcast. And the most profitable one is selling your own stuff. I've also seen people do very well with affiliate marketing. And this is where you're basically selling other people's stuff. But when you have the right product for the right audience, that can really resonate. And I know I used to have a weight loss show, and I had Chronometer, I had Fitbits, I forget a couple other products that I would just mention. And every time someone bought one, like every time somebody bought a Fitbit, I made $9. Well, after a while, it's pennies make dollars and they start to add up. And so I usually don't say, this is the way to monetize your show. Here's a bunch of them, try them in tandem and see which one works. And then you get into things like crowdfunding. And I always point out that the first part of that word is crowd. So again, you have to have an audience, because the kind of sad news is about 3% of your audience will take action on whatever you're doing. And so I've seen people with like Patreon. I actually like Supercast a little better. It makes it a little easier for the listener. But there are, there's PayPal, there's Buy Me a Coffee, all sorts of different ways that people can send you money to your show. And there are different strategies for that. Sometimes it's just bonus episodes. Sometimes it's ad-free. Jonathan Oakes does a show called Trivial Warfare, and he found out that his audience wanted to, because it's a trivia show, and he found out that his audience wanted to play. They wanted to be on the show. So he just made that a level of his Patreon, and that's working out really well. So that's another way that you can make money with your podcast. And then we get into advertising, and that's if you have anywhere around 10,000 downloads per episode. So, only about 10%, maybe less, of shows get that many downloads. You're really popular, and you can do what are called host read ads. And those pay anywhere from $15 to maybe $25. Right now they're around 20. And so you basically have somebody give you some talking points. I always try to personalize those if that's something you're doing. And then if you had, 10,000 downloads, you would get $20 for that one ad. And that's the one that everybody talks about. And I find that somewhat head scratching, because we can say over and over and over, less than 10% get that. And so nobody hears that as 93% of people won't, but that's what they're aiming for. And hey, aim high, I guess, go right ahead. The other type of ad is programmatic. And this just means it's already been recorded, and often you pick where you want the ad to go, but those pay much, much less. Anywhere from $3 to maybe $5, maybe a little more, but you have to realize those ads, when they come in, you're splitting part of that income with probably a service that found that for you. So it's an interesting way to monetize, especially if you have a lot of old episodes, because in some cases you can have those automatically put in for you. And it's, as one person put it, well, it's better than a poke in the eye. And I thought, well, aren't most things better than a poke in the eye? But so that's another way to do that. You can also, I've seen people make really decent money selling events. And so whether this is in person, I know Pod Save the Queen, I think that was the name of it, but they went on tour and they were selling out, 5,000 seat theaters, and the tickets were $40 each. And the thought,
Wow.
they were making a lot of money. And you think about that, it's not like a big musical act where they've got amplifiers and
Mhm.
trucks and lighting and smoke and fire. It's just give me 4 chairs and some microphones and we're good to go. So it's really cheap to take on the
Not
road.
like Taylor Swift, you mean?
Yeah,
So it's not like
exactly.
that kind of
Yeah.
concert.
And what was funny about that is that particular podcast has advertising in the
Mhm.
show, but this was a live show. They had no intention of having the audience sit through ads. You've already paid, money to hear us. And the audience actually started shouting out almost like it was one of their favorite songs. They'd be like, hey, do Blue Apron, do Blue Apron, because when they did their advertisements, they were so entertaining. And so,
Uh-huh.
come on, Hello Fresh, do it, hit me up with some better help. It was amazing. So, but they made a lot of money on that tour. And I realize you might
That is
think,
interesting, really. I
yeah,
haven't seen that, so I haven't got that such kind of idea. Maybe for the locals, they are only in the studio, like on TV studio, but never be on tour. I haven't seen this year in Indonesia.
well, and then other people, because they don't have a big enough audience to go from town to
Mm-hmm.
town, but you can still sell tickets to webinars if you're giving away something of value, that your audience
Mm-hmm.
wants and they're willing to pay for it. And that's the thing you have to realize is when, especially if you're going to try to monetize, a lot of times you're solving a problem for people. And that might be, here's how to do something. Or I just saw a comedian a couple weeks ago, and the problem he solved was he made me laugh and forget about whatever was going on in my life for a couple hours. So that's actually a service.
Wow, that's great. Yes, because
Yeah.
you were in the court this morning, and then
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
water heat. I'm
Right. It
sorry
might,
about that. That you have to go to somewhere else or need to take
yeah.
a shower.
Yeah. So that was fun. And so that can be something where you could actually sell tickets to an online event. And if you only get
Mm-hmm.
10 people, well, that's only 10 people, but it's a start. And then you can turn around and sell that recording. So that's another way that you can make money with your podcast. And then the other one people kind of forget is you can get free stuff. I talk about this in
Mm-hmm.
my book that I know I've gotten free gear before. And the key to that is don't contact, let's say I wanted to get a free microphone or something like that. I wouldn't contact the sales department because those people, their job is to sell you something. I always contact the marketing department because the marketing department's job is to get exposure for their product. So when you say, "Hey, can I try one of those whatever the gear is? I'd like to try it, make a video for YouTube and then talk about it on my podcast."
Mm-hmm.
That's right up their alley. And then I always say, and I'll be happy to send it back. And sometimes I send it back, but there are many times when they're like, "Nah, just keep it." And so it's free gear.
And that is okay without permission when they already send you.
Yeah. So the other one that I think a lot of people overlook, and I think it's almost really
Mm-hmm.
more valuable than the actual money you bring in, are the
Mm-hmm.
relationships. So if you're doing an interview show, don't just talk to that person once and when the interview is out, go, all right, thanks, our interview's live. No, reach out to that person every now and then. Not like, don't bug them, but every month or two or
Mm-hmm.
three, just check in and see how they're doing, because that way that person keeps you in their mind, so that if somebody goes, hey, do you know somebody that might know podcasting, or do you know somebody that might be good about whatever your specialty is, that person goes, actually, I just talked to someone about that. And so
Mm-hmm.
I've had a couple of different jobs that have fallen into my lap because somebody said, hey, do you know somebody who knows podcasting? And they said, oh, you should go talk to Dave Jackson. So that's to
Oh
me, I think
yeah.
one of the big things that really from podcasting that you can benefit from. So again, selling your own stuff, selling other people's stuff. Then there's advertising. So again, host read ads are much more profitable than programmatic, but they're there. Then you get into uh, again, just donations with PayPal, things like that, free stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and relationships, and then opportunities. That's the other one that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we kind of overlook when somebody says, will you come speak here? Or In my case, I got a book deal because I had a podcast. So had I not had my podcast, I wouldn't have got my book deal. So that's the other thing that, again, we kind of focus on ads a lot, and there's nothing wrong with ads, but there are many other ways that you can benefit from or profit from your podcast.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I did
So-
want to mention one other aspect that Dave did touch on with the host reads. There's kind of two levels of that. There's shows that have hit that 10,000 download mark, and those shows typically can maybe work with an agency to sell their show to brands and advertisers that are out there. But if you're under that 10,000 number, you may be able to sell direct to brands and get a campaign that you would keep all of the revenue from. So in some ways, it's really there's two levels here. There's the representative side of the host reads, and then there's the individual sale of the podcaster that has built those relationships, like Dave just said. Oftentimes, if you are targeted with your guests, those guests could potentially at some point be host read sponsors for your podcast. So if you stay in touch with them, opportunities can come from lots of different directions from those relationships that you've invested time in promoting them. They're going to be more likely to support you.
Yeah, and I know I have the School of Podcasting is a show about podcasting, and I walked into a podcasting event, and Dan, the guy from Focusrite, said, "Hey, Dave Jackson, I want to give you some money." That was the first thing he said to me, because his goal was to get his product that they made for podcasters in front of podcasters. And I didn't have 10,000 downloads an episode, but I had what he wanted, which was a group of podcasters. And so we hammered out it's targeted. So that's where.
So actually, people see that you build a community. Also, it's not only about the podcast that you upload on the podcast platform, right? Is that what you mean, Dave?
Well, yeah, it could be. I had my podcast audience, but I also had social media, and I know a lot of people get really excited about ratings and reviews, and that's fine. There's social proof that will help with advertising, but the thing that'll really get an advertiser grab their attention would be an email list. So when you say, I've got X amount of people on X and X amount of people on Instagram, and I have 10,000 people on an email list, they're going to start to salivate. They're like, wait a minute, because when you send a marketing message out to your email list, and again, it has to have value, but if they open it, they're now one click away from being on that sponsor's website. So I always say, don't just say, would you like to sponsor the podcast? Wrap it up in kind of a package and say, well, it's X amount for me to mention it in the show. It's X amount for me to put it in the show notes. And then it's X amount for me to mention it on social and X amount to put it in the newsletter. And then you go, oh, by the way, we're having a special right now. You can have all those mentions for the low price of X amount of money, and it's a minimum 3-month purchase. And then that way they feel like they're getting a deal.
What about you, Rob? Do you have any other ideas besides the 7 ways to monetize the podcast that
I think
they've already delivered?
Yeah, I think one is a little bit of a derivative from kind of the online streaming market, which is kind of like brand deals of sorts, where you could potentially be like an independent representative of the brand, right? So they're kind of sponsoring you to either use their tools, give demo videos, do all sorts of things like that to support their brand. Not so much from a necessarily an advertiser relationship, but more from a content creator support kind of person that can kind of help educate users on the service or the brand. And I know Dave, you've done a lot of that over the years too, and I'm sure that's worked out pretty well for you.
Yeah, there's that. There are all sorts of different kind of strategies you can do with, like I've made videos that demonstrate a product that I have an affiliate link for. So it's taking that item and not just mentioning it in my podcast, but I'll make a YouTube video for it actually, especially if it's software. That's a no-brainer.
Right.
So, you can kind of take all of these different items and work different strategies into them.
And then about the advertisement on our podcast, because I haven't started yet, so I don't know much about it. But there are so many opinions in the group that when they accept the advertisers automatically from the platform where they are in, and then it's not aligned with their shows, and then the people started to lose the temper because of it, like, too many advertisement, while on the other side the podcaster also need to monetize. It's totally different with the YouTubers. Of course, now we say that YouTube also has podcasts, like the video podcast, but I think that is completely different, right? And I think here we go again. I think Devi agrees with Todd Cochrane about it, that YouTube is not really a podcast. So
Well,
I saw
it's
your comment in the group, Dave. And then
yeah,
what about that? What about the advertisement that it's automatically in the podcast by the program, right? Because in YouTube, people talk about monetization all the time, but in the podcast, in the group, sometimes I feel that people are very proud, like podcast is an expensive hobby, that they work hard for the podcast. They don't need the money. They are rich people who do the hobby podcasting, would like to build the community without certain goals. Well, I
yeah.
learned from Todd also. That's why I started this podcast, because I have goals, right? Not because I am rich and then I want to do the podcast as a hobby or something like that, Dave. So
Yeah, I mean,
what do you think about?
I have like one of my hobbies is I like to go bike riding. And every year I
Mm-hmm,
probably spend somewhere between $100 and $200 getting my bike tuned up, making sure everything's
mm-hmm,
because I want to be safe. I've never made a dime from
mm-hmm,
my bike, and I've never had somebody say, "Oh, what'd you do over the weekend?" And I'm like, "Oh, I rode my bike on the north, track of the et cetera, et cetera." And so I always think it's kind of funny when somebody says, "Oh, you start a podcast." They're like, "Oh, yeah," and then they go, "You making any money at that?" I'm like, No, it's a hobby. You don't have to make money with your podcast." But yeah, it's the
mm-hmm.
the whole video
I
thing.
want to make money with my podcast. It's very
Well,
expensive to
Well,
rent a studio like this, and then I have to go in the morning. Like, of course, it is 4 a.m. in Bali, but it is like 3 a.m. in Java. I am on the street
yeah.
already.
Well, so
It is
so
a
who
hard work to podcast now.
Okay. So what strategy are you using? Are you selling your own product or service?
Not yet. For the time being, I
Okay.
would like to build my podcast first, like being disciplined. You mentioned on our discussion on the messenger also that you remind me that the quality is better than the quantity, but this is my way to be disciplined to create the content every day on the next 100 days, right? Whether
Right.
that is
So,
live streaming or maybe it is like recorded, but I'm a perfectionist, so no matter how, if I don't do it, then I will keep deleting when I record it. So it is the best way. It is about not about the quality only for me, because I never be satisfied with my result, right? I always want to learn and improve all the time. And you know that I don't like my own voice. So here we go again. It's not
well,
about the quality, because if it is about the quality, then I would love my own voice, like our top voice over Jody Krangle. Then I will love my voice if I have such kind of voice, Dave. So yes.
so at this point, if you're just starting your podcast,
Mm-mm.
really you should be in that step one of not even worrying about monetizing your show. Because what happens
Yes,
sometimes
of
is when
course.
you first start out, you're not getting that many downloads because you're brand new, and
Nope.
that's just the way
Nope.
it is. And so that can be a little bit of a I don't know, makes you a little sad. You kind of hope you had more people listening, and then when you go, oh, I'm doing this and I'm not making any money, that's just another negative side
Mhm.
effect of when you first start a podcast. So I'm like, well, take that one out of here. Just
right.
focus on
Mhm.
understanding who it is I'm making this for specifically, not women that are 50, like really get specific of who it is. And then why am I doing this? What is the reason I'm going to
Mhm.
do this? because if you don't get your why, you're going to burn out. You're just going to burn out. So
That's
then you have
true.
to figure
That's
out,
true.
yeah, what can I talk about that's going to move people towards my why and yet entertain the
Mm-hmm.
who? And that's your what. And then do that for about 3 years, delivering content that is so good that your listeners can't help but tell a
Oh, I
friend.
will be so good, Dave. That's
Yeah.
why. What I mean is, okay, I thought about myself. This is not about me. This is about you as an expert, and then to give
Well, I
an
know, but you,
advice for our audience, right? And it will be on our book for the tips from the top leaders in podcasting and live streaming. So this is great, Dave, that you what is it share about the 7 ways. But another question also, it's like about the how do you call it? Rob mentioned about the agency of at marketing. Are they legal to promote the podcast that way? Sometimes, in here they pay people, or they have a paid community to like your podcast, to download your podcast. The same way with YouTube.
yeah, I mean, I always say really marketing your podcast boils down to a couple things. Number
Mm-hmm.
one, who is my audience? Specifically, who is my audience?
Mm-hmm.
Go to where they are. Now, that could be Facebook groups, it could be Reddit, it could be being a guest on somebody else's show, it could be going to events, but figure out who your audience is and go to where they are. Then
Mm-hmm.
make friends with them. And everybody skip step 3. Make friends with them so that when you say something, they want to hear it. And what I mean by that is if I'll tell you a story. I found, this is before Facebook, and there was an online
Mm-hmm.
forum, and it was ex DJs, ex radio DJs. So these people used to be on the radio and they weren't. And when I walked in, I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my gosh, these people should have a podcast. So I figured out who my audience was. I went to where they were, and I skipped step 3, make friends with them. And instead, I went to step 4, which is tell them about your podcast. So I walked into a group of
Mm-hmm.
people that I was like, oh, this is my target audience. And I was like, hey, I'm Dave Jackson. You should come over. I can help you get back on the air on the School of Podcasting. You should go over there, schoolofpodcasting.com. And what did they say? Who is this spamming idiot? And they kicked me out of the forum. So you have to make friends with people,
Right.
so
That's
so
true.
and bring value to the conversation so that they'll actually listen to you when you have something to say. So figure out who your audience is, go to where they are, make friends with them, and then tell them about your show. And that's really kind of the same thing, whether it's advertising on another show or
Mm-hmm.
Facebook groups. In Facebook groups, I go in and answer a lot of questions, because it doesn't take any time really to do that. And then, I don't get a ton of traffic, but it is it's in the top 5, because people will go, wow, that was a
Mm-hmm.
really good answer. Who is this Dave Jackson guy? And then they
Mhm.
click on my profile, and I have it set that anybody can see my profile, and they click on my website. So
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things where I think we all want that 10,000 download switch. If I just do this one thing, 10,000 downloads, money will fall from heaven. And as soon as I find it, I'll
Mm-hmm.
let you know. But it takes determination. It takes some perseverance and a little
Mm-hmm.
luck. A lot of times, I think luck definitely plays into it sometimes. So
Yeah, and also
And then,
there is an
yeah,
expectation
go
of
on, Rob.
of actually achieving that 10,000 download number in the first 4 weeks.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's not
Yeah,
realistic to
but
even
that is
expect that.
a kind of marketing also, right? It's like you can be like 6, 7 figures
Oh yeah.
quotes only in 1 month, while they experience it so many ups and downs in the last 30 years, so that they can reach it wasn't mentioned that way, right? Is it the same with podcast also? And then the image about why people say that I want to be a YouTuber, not I want to be a podcaster, Dave. So how to change that kind of image for the podcast?
Well, that came about because Facebook and um, Google really had advertising wrapped up
Mm-mm,
pretty tight. I mean, there's some other companies, but they were the
mm-mm,
the giant two, especially online. And then this little thing came along called TikTok and took about 4 billion of revenue out of their pie. And so YouTube was like, wait, hold on, what? And so they're like, we got to get people talking about YouTube again. Cause when TikTok first came out, it was
Mm-hmm.
TikTok all the time, just TikTok. And everybody's starting to look like, YouTube, that's for old people. Right. So YouTube is like, we got to do
Yes,
something. And they said, oh,
especially the teenagers here.
yeah. So they said, I know YouTube is now a podcast. They just busted out their magic
Mm-hmm.
wand and they're like, hold on, you
Poof.
are now a
Alakazam,
YouTuber.
abracadabra.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and there it was. And I always just tell people because I get called a curmudgeon if I say YouTube's not a podcast. It's content.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just say, look, when you make a Spotify podcast, a video podcast, it goes to Spotify. When you make a YouTube
Mm-hmm.
video podcast, it goes to YouTube. And if you set up a little check mark, it'll go to YouTube Music. If you make what we used to call a traditional video podcast, it'll go to about 15 different apps, including Apple. And so,
Mm-hmm.
that's the part that makes me frustrated is I'm sure at Podcast Movement, Tom Webster is going to read some stats
Mm-hmm.
about podcasting, and they'll say video podcasting, what we used to call
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, is exploding, especially on, and I know this is shocking, YouTube. And I'm like, you just told me that YouTube is getting popular on YouTube. And there's no
Mm-hmm.
way now to strip out the YouTube stats because everybody's calling it a podcast. And so to
Well,
me, I'm not going to
YouTube's
lose.
calling it a podcast. So
Yeah. Yeah. And that's I always tell people when you hear you have to start a video podcast, you're just a moron if you don't start a video podcast. I go, and where's that coming from? Oh, that's right, YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
So, I go back because I'm a musician. When I grew up, country music doesn't sound anything like it does now. When I listen to country music now, it sounds like AC/DC with a banjo in the back. And so,
yeah,
but
Mm-hmm.
they still call it country. And I'm
yeah.
like, I call
That
that
sounds
pop.
very old, Dave. I
Yeah. And
wasn't
so,
born, baby.
yeah. Well, so what's funny is now they'll say country music is the number one selling genre. And I'm like, well, yeah, because we
Yeah.
changed the definition of what country music is. So
Right.
it's, but
Oh, okay.
I giggle when people say, well, how do you know it's a podcast? And they'll go, oh, there's a microphone in the shot, or somebody's having a conversation. And so I've just told everybody, I go, it's not really a podcast, but I'm not gonna die on that hill at this point. I'm
Right.
just like,
Right.
just realize our stats
Yeah.
are gonna be really confusing now. So it is what it
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah, Dave, did you know if it looks like a podcast, sounds like a podcast, it must be a
It
podcast. So,
must be a podcast.
yeah, so
Must
that
be a
equates to
podcast,
this
no matter
really,
how. Uh, or will there be any company like the giant company like YouTube that makes for plate for podcast? Even though I knew from Todd Cochrane that we have to buy for the plate, we have to pay, not to buy for the plate, something like that. Are you going to create that kind of plate for podcasters, Dave?
Well, I mean, Google was 3% there. I mean, they had 3% of the
Mm-hmm.
market. All they had to do
Mm-hmm.
was, and what drove me nuts
keep it
about
alive.
this, yeah, the software was on Android phones. All they had to do was make the icon appear, much like Apple did, and
Mm-hmm.
they didn't. And I think Google has a problem where the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, or I think they come out with kind of like Rob was talking earlier about expectations. I thought they would just say we are Google and we now have Google Podcast and expect it to take over the market. And they got up to about
Mm-hmm.
3%. And when it wasn't continuing to grow, I'm not sure what was going on with it. They killed it. And instead of just going with it and
Oh,
promoting it more and things like that, I loved Google Podcast. It was great for somebody who was brand new to podcasting, especially if they didn't have a
but it's
smartphone.
not there anymore. Also
Yeah,
here, we don't
it's
have it
gone. Yep.
anymore. And I, mm,
Along with, Google has killed so many products. And that's why at this point, seeing Google kill so many different programs that were
sorry.
really great, I don't trust them anymore. So
Okay.
it is what it
Yeah,
is.
Yeah, it's a
just
common
like
trait with
Spotify here also. Like I use Spotify for the music only, not for the podcast. But people use it because it is free, and you can do the premium with the without the advertisement. So it will be easy for me to listen to the music on the uh, country like this, developing country like this, because it doesn't take a lot of data, especially if you don't have Wi-Fi everywhere. You use the mobile data. YouTube takes a lot of data, Dave. So I think it is the same with the other podcast platform, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, Spotify, in my opinion, is not a great podcast uh,
No.
app because there's so much going on in there. Same thing with YouTube Music. That's why I like
Mm-mm.
things like I love Overcast, I love Castamatic, Podcast Guru is pretty
Mm-hmm.
good, Podurama, but those are all based on
Podcast
one
Guru.
thing, playing traditional podcasts, and they do in some of those actually
Mm-hmm.
play video, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Rob,
a
would you like
mixed.
to add about it? Mm-mm.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you compare a typical podcast consumption app to these music streaming platforms like a
Mm-hmm.
YouTube Music or Spotify, they're trying to cater to lots of different types of content kind of users, right? Which creates
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes a confusing interface to get
Yeah.
access to any of the content, and that kind of stratifies the market, and also leads to what we see in the stats is that the per user consumption of podcasts on YouTube as well as Spotify is much lower than it is on
Mm-hmm.
Apple Podcasts, and that's because people's time is getting spread across lots of different things on those platforms, audiobooks to music so people aren't consuming as much podcast content on those platforms as they are on like an Overcast or an app,
Mm-hmm.
even an Apple Podcast, because Apple Podcasts created their own separate app on the platform. So when people go into Apple Podcasts, they only consume podcasts. They're not
Mm-hmm.
looking to consume music at the same time.
And does it take minimum 50 podcasts upload? We have to upload our podcast for 50 episodes or something to be seen on the Apple now.
No,
Is
that's
that
not
No,
true?
true.
it's one.
It takes one. you
Only
know,
one. Yeah, because
yeah.
I read it somewhere in the group. I forget what group last night that it takes like 50 so you can be seen on
Now,
the Apple.
I'm going to publicly say this. I answer a lot of
Mm-hmm.
questions in Facebook, and I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
somebody might look at me and go, "That guy's giving bad advice." But I see a lot of really. First of all, if you have a question about your media host, whether that's Captivate or Libsyn or Buzzsprout or whoever, ask their tech
Mm-hmm.
support, because I know those platforms and I see people ask a question and I see people give like absolutely no question about it 100%
Mm-hmm.
wrong answers, and I'm like, ugh, you're going the wrong way. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's great, it's take it for what it is. It's free advice, and sometimes you get what you pay for. But I saw somebody the other day ask about their podcast, and they said, if I interview someone and it's a sensitive subject, say someone who was molested by their parents, like if I do a
Mm-hmm.
podcast about that, can I get sued because I interviewed that person and this person said my father was not a good guy? Can I get sued for that? And the one guy's like, no, it's like, no, you absolutely can.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's
called
I was like,
slander.
yeah. And so I was like, you don't ask for legal advice in a Facebook group. And
Right.
so
Mm-hmm.
it was just like, so every time I see
Yeah,
one
Dave.
now, so
What I mean is, don't you feel that sometimes you are too hard? You even post that, oh, this is not right. This is a bad advice. Like so
no,
you will have a lot of enemies that way. They like you
well,
give like
Yeah,
spamming
but you
people,
can't.
like you say hi, hi
yeah.
Yeah,
there or something like that. Sometimes I'm shocked to read your post.
but you can't allow wrong information to get out there because people will get
That's
in
true.
trouble.
That's true.
Yeah.
Only
As
I feel that Dave is too hard on it. You know what I mean?
well,
Are there any other ways that are softer? You know what I mean?
I know what I mean, I'm sure I have people that don't like me because I'll say that doesn't make any sense, but I almost always try to say,
Mhm.
and this is what I'm basing my opinion on. And if I'm uninformed, if I'm missing something, please let me know. But I always try to say,
Mhm.
this is why this, like, when somebody will go, oh, free media hosts are great, because what's going to happen is I'm going to build my audience over here. And then when I get a big enough audience, I'm going to get advertising. And I go, that business model doesn't work. And I've seen it fall flat on its face at least 3 times, because what happens is a podcaster will finally build that audience. And when they go to get advertising, instead of staying where they are on the free media host, they take their audience to one and they'll pay for it because now they can afford it. And the free media host goes, wait, where you going? We got you some sponsors. And they're like, yeah, I don't want to split the money with you. See you, bye. I'm taking my audience over here. And that free media host then goes out of business. And I'm just, so when stuff like that comes up, I'm like, hey, let me give you a little history lesson and why that probably isn't going to work. But as I'm sure I have some people like, that Dave Jackson, he's a big blowhard. But I know a lot of people are like, I'm glad that guy's out here, because he is, calling it out when somebody's doing something that I'm like, that's probably not going to be smart. So, I mean, trust me, I
That's
would
true.
I would love it sometimes to name names, because every day I wake up to a bad pitch and I just want to go out on Facebook and
Oh.
go, this company just pitched me somebody who doesn't fit my
Mm-hmm.
podcast at all, and just call them out. And but then nobody would ask me to be on their show, which on the other hand, if I can avoid getting bad pitches, maybe I should, but people just don't do their homework. But
I understand that, but now you are also having a new position on the new podcast, right? Congratulations for it. By the way, I forget to congratulate you here officially, and then you move from the lip sync to the new company. How do you feel now about it, Dave? Do
I'm
you make that uh right decision? I mean, is it a right decision for you to move on that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was hard because
Uh,
I've known, Rob and Elsie and a lot of people at that company for almost 20 years. So it's hard to leave your friends. But
Wow, 20
my
years.
back
Yeah.
yeah, my background's is in teaching, and I was just doing less and less of that. And so when this position
Mm-mm.
opened up, and I've known Brendan for, since Podpage came on board. He actually
Mm-mm.
consulted with me about what he should do with Podpage. So I somewhat shaped the early days of Podpage. So I mean, I've been there now 3 weeks. This will be my third week,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just it's so much a better fit for what I do. So yeah, I'm loving it so
Mm.
far. And I'll still
And
be in
what are the big goals on Podpits for your projects, Dave?
world domination, pretty much. Just no,
Whoa!
no. We're always and you can do this with your
I
podcast
know.
too. You
Mm-hmm.
what one thing is to define what you are, but also define what
Yes.
you're not. So Podpage will never
Mm-mm.
be a media host, because there are places like Buzzsprout and Captivate and Libs, and we don't need to
Mm-mm.
recreate the wheel by that. There's Blueberry. And then
Mm-mm.
we're not going to be an email list, because there's ConvertKit and MailChimp and all that. But what we want to do is
Mm-mm.
make it so easy to make a great looking website without being a coder, that just integrates with all these other programs. And so we're going to
For the
continue to do,
podcasters.
yeah, continue to do that. But also now with me on board, we're hoping to help people not only grow their web presence, but grow their podcast as well, because podcasts that are growing are much
Mm-hmm.
less likely to cancel their account because they quit their podcast. That's, uh,
Mm-hmm.
one of our biggest churn, where people leave. The reason they love Podpage, they just quit their podcast. So hopefully I
Mm-hmm.
can help people grow their show so that they don't quit their podcast, which means they won't quit Podpage.
Mm-hmm. And Rob, it is also about trust that we can connect with, right? We are going to talk about trust for the podcasters. Now there are cancellation or even, I don't know, removal on our programs on the post on social media. What do you think about that? So yeah, we really need podcasts, I guess, for the podcaster to create their website.
Yeah, I think this trust topic really dovetails really well to what we were just talking about Dave, and
Mm-hmm.
and I do the same thing with trying to dispel bad information out there as well. And for us, Dave and I have been around this medium for so long now that we've seen a lot of these topics, or these ideas that have come from the community, from people that are new to podcasting that don't really understand the medium, but they think they do.
Mhm.
And so they put these ideas out there, which everyone is welcome to do. It's just one of the things that's important to myself and to Dave and a few others in the podcasting space is to give people good advice. And what one of the thing is about that is that Dave and
Mhm.
I and others are concerned about our reputations in the medium, right? So, but
Yes.
but there is a human factor here, and that is over a period of years, we see these things happen so many times where people give bad advice that maybe we get a little edgy about it, right? Where we're not as tolerant of people's helping people by giving them bad advice. So we tend to maybe are a little bit harsher towards them because we have developed kind of a little bit of an intolerance to people giving
Mhm.
bad advice. And I'm not saying that that's an excuse for having some intolerance or a
Mhm.
reason why it's okay. I just think that that's a natural human trait that we have, is that once we have to repeat things over and over and over again, we kind of build up a resentment towards those type of topics. And so trust is an important aspect of what Dave does, and it's always been an important aspect
Mhm.
about what I do to have a perceived level of integrity in this and honesty. And trust comes from giving people good advice that actually is based on truth. And sometimes people don't like to hear the truth because it's contradictory to
Mhm.
the misinformation that's out there. And it's one of the core challenges that we have in our world today, is that there's so much information out there and not everybody knows the correct answer to it and everybody's seeking it, right? But there are a
Mhm.
lot of inputs out there that are taking people down bad paths. So it is important for us to have people that are willing to stand up and share the truth. I think the challenge that like even Dave and I have is we can be seen as kind of like, like a Debbie Downer or something like that, because we're dispelling what people are perceiving as like maybe a leg up on
Mhm.
something or a way to achieve success quickly, by sharing truth and facts about the situation that they will discover on their
Mhm.
own if they go down this path of that they're being given as a recommendation, which is wrong. They're going to find out the hard way. And so, what we care about is sharing good information that will take people down a positive path that will
Mhm.
ultimately help them do like what Dave just said, is to keep them podcasting. You know,
Yeah, I've seen
yeah. Go ahead, Dave.
there are people that will just there's there's some guy in a spare bedroom. He's got a horrible job and he wants to quit. And somebody comes along and
Mhm.
like, I can help you escape the cubicle life. You're gonna have the life of your dreams. All you have to do is start a
Mhm.
podcast and you can be
Yeah.
Right.
making money from day one. And that person, it's only, $4,000. And I'm like, what? And so this person
Mhm.
goes for the 3 easy payments of $1,200 or whatever it is, and they
Yep.
do that, and they'll put them on some platform where it's super low, rates for pod, so you're making 0.003 cents a download, and okay, we said you're making money from day one, you are, enjoy your $1.50, and so
Mhm.
Right.
I would rather go, okay, let's, I'm not trying to be like Rob said, Debbie Downer, but be
Mhm.
careful. I just saw another media host today on AppSumo, and it said
Yeah.
things like global statistics. Every media host has that, global distribution.
Right.
Again, every podcaster has that. I mean, all their features were nothing. There was nothing there that I was like, ooh, that's different. They didn't even have dynamic content. And I was like, you're not even up to speed with what is kind of currently the norm. And somebody asked me, should I get that media host? And I go, there's not, yeah, it's
Mhm.
cheap, but we just had a media host, Bcast, went out of business. By the way, when they came out, I'm like, hey, that's not, I wouldn't put my eggs in that basket. And they had this really insanely cheap deal on AppSumo, and they
Yeah.
got a ton of people, that were then not paying them any more money for support and development and all the things that go into running a company. And they said when they went out of business, one of the things that they kind of wish they hadn't done was use AppSumo. And I'm a huge AppSumo person, but I also know anything I buy over there, I'm like, okay, they may not be. I hope they're around once they
Mm-hmm.
go off of AppSumo. But that was one I just was like, that's not a good. There's I've seen a media host right now, and I can't remember the name of them. It's HomePod, I think, but they give you unlimited episodes, unlimited
Mm-hmm.
shows, and unlimited bandwidth. So you could actually start your own hosting company with an account you could pay this guy $20 and start your own hosting company. And that's just a bad business model. Everybody they limit you somehow on how much you can upload or how much you can download. And this guy's doing neither. And I'm like, you will go out of business. I give that guy 5 years, and unless he changes his business plan, because all it takes is one show to get really popular, and there goes all the profit. So I've seen that probably 2 or 3 times, and I'm just like,
And
all
how
right.
to see if the information is right or not, if the advice is right or not. Yeah, if they know you, Dave and Rob, just like me, I'm lucky to know both of you. So if there is something wrong, I can ask you directly. But what about those people out there? And then the temptation for marketing what is it? The podcast for like the people like from Bangladesh or India or Pakistan, they are a podcast marketer that you can, okay, get minimal like 1,000 downloads on YouTube and then also on your podcast, something like that. So how to know the truth about the right information or the good advice or not?
Common sense.
Yeah, if it sounds too good to be true,
uh,
it probably is.
Maybe for the startup, it's very difficult to differ it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's and sometimes we just got to take our lumps. The first time I tried to sell something
Mm-hmm.
online, I went out, bought the domain, built the website, had the product, put it
Mm-hmm.
out there, and then I found out that my competition was doing something much better and much cheaper. So sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that's called a learning lesson. So yeah, I
Yes.
just if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And if you want my opinion or Rob's opinion, we're pretty easy to find online. But that's what
Mhm.
sucks people in is they will pay money, way too much money, to people that are, you know,
Trying to
maybe
cheat the process or cheat the
yeah,
system. Right.
yeah. It really I found the magic secret.
Oh,
I
yes.
had a teacher in high school that said something. He said, "Don't you think if there was a way to steal without being caught, someone would have thought of it by now?" And
Mhm.
so when the person goes, "Oh, I have found the magic bullet," it's all you have to do is this and follow my 4 steps and you will get 10,000 downloads, and you're either a scamming somebody, because there are
Mhm.
promoters right now where they'll say things like, "Oh, it's an IAB certified download." Okay,
Yes, with AI.
but it's done on a player that was never clicked play. They downloaded in the background, and that, in my opinion, is called
Oh,
fraud.
okay, okay.
But you can and anytime you hear somebody say, "Hi, do my service, we will take your file from your media host and we will send them
Mhm.
to a page with our player," right there, red flag, our player. And we will, some of these places, they'll have them sign up for notifications, but you don't
Mhm.
own you don't own those emails. They do. So now you have somebody between you and your audience. So it's, they prey on the uninformed, and that makes me mad. That's when I want to come out, and that's why sometimes I get a little aggressive, because I feel like Papa Bear protecting his kids, and I'm like, get that out of here.
Mhm.
So
And about trust, Rob, it's not only about the content trust because Dave mentioned that he cannot trust a platform also like Google because it was closed. And then what do you think about it? How to protect ourselves? Of course, we have to build our website for our own platform, right? But then not everyone can afford to build a website or have time, to do that because it's a lot of work to build a website.
Yeah,
mm,
it depends on what we're talking about here. If we're talking about building trust with your audience, or
Mhm.
are we talking about
Mhm.
building trust with service providers or platforms, or
Both, of course.
there's kind of two different issues here. If you're a content
Mm-hmm.
creator that's really focused on trying to build trust with your audience, there's certain techniques and
Mm-hmm.
things that you need to do to show
Mm-hmm.
that you have some integrity, like some honesty,
Yes.
some sharing of personal experience that maybe is verifiable, or people have seen, or people understand, that actually makes sense to people. And I think that's a key element with any kind of podcaster, is that they speak from their
Mm-hmm.
heart, they speak from that they actually care, and but they also demonstrate that to their audience by their actions and by their behaviors. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what all of us have to do now, like never before, because our world is really increasingly becoming, um, I hate to use this term, but almost infested with people that are trying to take advantage of other people, and trying to scam people. I know I'm constantly
Mm-hmm.
getting bombarded by people trying to scam on all sorts of levels of all sorts of things now, and it really comes from this world that we live in now, where people are increasingly becoming more desperate, or
Mm-hmm.
have lost their jobs, or they're looking for quick solutions to their life problems. And sometimes there are charlatans out there that will take advantage of those kind of needs that people have. And I think right now, in a tough economy, I think that those people are really coming out of the woodwork, like in a degree. So one thing, as a content creator, you can really stand out, is if you
Mm-hmm.
come to your program with a high level of integrity and honesty, and be able to somehow demonstrate that. I think it is a challenge to be able to demonstrate
Mm-hmm.
that, but I do think it comes from your ability to correspond with people in a public format, like on a live stream. I think that's one of the things with live that's compelling, and what I've discovered is that live creates a more authentic kind of experience for the audience, where
Mm-hmm.
a recorded program, um, it's a little easier to to do things that might be a little deceptive, right? Just because there's
Mm-hmm.
post production and editing and things like that, where a live program is more authentic. And I do think that as we look forward into the future, I think live is going to increasingly have a higher place on the scale of trust. And because you can't really, I mean, unless you're an AI generated character that is being created inside of a live stream, that person that's doing that show is authentic and real, because they're right there.
Mm-hmm. And then what about the trust to the platform or to the company that help the podcasters?
Yeah, I think the key on that trust level is the company's level of support, right? And
Mm-hmm.
are
Yeah,
they
yeah.
are they making themselves available to their user community at a reachable level? I think we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing increasing companies cut back on their customer support because they're trying to cut back on
Mm-hmm.
expenses. And what that creates
Mm-hmm.
is an increasing over time distrust from their customer base, because they aren't as responsive to questions or concerns or bugs or issues. So I think
That's true.
that's the pressure that we see on the trust level with service providers or vendors, and that's one of the challenges with AI services, because oftentimes those
Mm-hmm.
companies are created with just a couple of people, and they're not really building out a robust company that can support their customers. They're very dependent on AI technologies to do everything. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is one of the telltale signs that a company is maybe not as stable or trustworthy
Mm-hmm.
as a company that's built out a strong kind of channel out there too, like on a YouTube channel or something like that, that is creating content, doing live streams, giving access to their founders or their support people on a regular basis. And I think that's really key.
Can I
And
address one brand now? Because you've been there, and then I've seen that now it changes a lot for the service also, especially to address the client's problem, and they put it in the group like StreamYard, right? Because it has changed the owner. So
Mhm.
that's why I try to have the Restream right now, because a long time ago Restream sponsored me. And then when I chat with the customer service for the technical stuff, they are very very fast in responding my problems or addressing my problems, Rob. So what do you think about such thing, that there is the decline, or less service or something like that? I don't know what's happening actually, but I read the problems or the complaints in the group about the quality of the streaming.
Yeah, anytime you see a company change hands like that, there is a risk
Mm-mm,
that there could be a change in their philosophy around support and the resources that they're willing to put
mm-mm,
into it. I think if you're using StreamYard as an example of this, I think
mm-hmm.
the thing with StreamYard was they had set such a high bar of support. Even their two
Yes.
founders did a weekly live stream that the community was
Yeah,
able to
on
get
the town
access
hall.
to the
That's
two
true.
founders, right? And so that built
Mm-mm,
a level of trust in that platform and in that service that they were responsive to the community's feedback, and
mm-hmm,
open to new ideas. Where this new company that's come into really hasn't embraced their community at that same high level, and thus they've kind of lost some trust. And I think there's something to learn from that. That's important as you look to companies holding on to trust as we move into the future. I don't know, Dave, do you have any comments about this?
yeah, the other thing that can build trust with a company is
mm-hmm,
when they come out with new features and it fits the customer feels like, wow, these people really know me. It'd
Yeah.
be like going to dinner and somebody goes, here, I made you some pizza. It's gluten free. And they go, I didn't even know you knew I was gluten free or whatever it is. They're like, these people really know me.
oh,
And now I trust their food. So when you come out and say, hey, we're doing something new with our platform, we build this product, and
mm-hmm,
you kind of go, all right, I get it, but it's not for me. And then they come out again, they go, we got another product. Here it is. Look, isn't it cool? And you go, eh,
Yeah.
maybe, I mean, really not for me. So eventually, and then if you see another company that comes out with new features and you're like, well, that looks cool. Oh, that
Yeah.
looks even cool.
mm-hmm,
All of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, I think I'm a better fit over there. So that's another way you can keep the trust of your audience by listening to, which always goes back
That's
to
the key.
podcasting and every, listen to your
mm-hmm,
customer and give them what they want. And if you can't give them what they want, explain why you're not going to give it to them, because maybe it's not a good fit. There are times when with Podpage, there are times people wanted to do all sorts of stuff, and you're like, yeah, that's not what we do. You
Yeah.
might want to look
mm-hmm,
into WordPress, and we hate to send people away, but we're not going to lie to them and like, no, no, we don't do that. That's not something we do.
mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and I think, Dave, this topic also dovetails back to what you were saying at the earlier part of the stream around knowing your
Yes,
audience, and also
no idea.
having pathways to hear what your audience wants.
yeah,
When I think one of the things that podcasters need to figure out pathways for is how do they find out who their audience is and who are they reaching
Mm-hmm,
versus who they think they're reaching.
yeah,
And there's pathways to do that through surveys and through just one-on-one pathways that might be there.
mm-hmm,
Um, but I do think it's a challenge. These things are not easy to do, and that's why a lot of companies don't do them, is create those feedback processes from their users or from their listeners. It's kind of a similar
mm-hmm.
dynamic.
yeah. I
Yeah,
was,
what about the process to determine our audience? Just like in live streaming, before I was in the our coaching universe, but then I didn't feel comfortable with the coaching world anymore. And at that time, Rob suggested me to do the media branding, which is I love so much. That's why I want to focus on the media branding right now. And at that time, even we decided to change the name from our coaching universe into live podcast, right, Rob? So about the audience, how to build it, because for me, it is by the time that I know who I want to talk to, or to address the audience. Not because I define my audience in the very beginning that I want to work with the experts in coaching, but then I love the media branding, Dave. So which one is the right way actually, to determine your audience first, or by the time that you know who your audience is?
Well, you defined your strategy. I want to interview
Oh, okay.
experts. Okay, that's
Mm-mm.
what, but then I go, why and for who? Like, you've got me and Rob here. We're talking about podcasting and monetization and trust.
Mhm.
But if the
Yes.
people watching right now are not interested in podcasting, we're wasting
They're
their
not going to
Mhm.
time.
watch. Right. We're not
Yeah.
going to watch.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to figure out, why am I doing this? Do I want to be seen as an
Mhm.
expert? Do I want to get the word out? Do I want to make money with this or not? Do I want
Mhm.
to just have fun with my friends? There are all sorts of reasons to start a
Mhm.
podcast. And then who is it
Mhm.
for and what do they want? Because if you give me a pizza with green peppers and mushrooms, I'm not eating it.
Mhm.
That's not my thing. But if you can give me one with
That's
the right
true. But
ingredients,
our discussion is not only for podcasters. I see it works for
well,
other content creators too. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
it
Yeah.
works for bloggers. If a blogger is writing
Mhm.
articles that his audience doesn't want, or you need to write
Mhm.
articles for that audience, and then you have to promote it. If it's a business, you have to listen to your audience and give them
Mhm.
what they want.
Fundamentally, we're in the people relationship business is what we are.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
building
Yeah.
trust and relationships is core to podcasters' long-term success. So, I think it's really important to think about the psychology of what you're doing, and that's really what Dave's talking about, is trying to
Mhm.
align people's priorities and interests with you as a content creator to give them
Mhm.
value for their time, right? And why they're
Mhm.
connecting with you needs to be
Mhm.
rationalized.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
a
Yes.
great term. It has to be and logical, rationalized and logical. This
Mhm.
is going to connect this to this, that will do this. And then if it's not working the way you want it, you can kind of go back
Mhm.
and like let's take if I if
Evaluate it. Yes.
if I take podcasting advertising and I make a 40-second clip and I put it on Buzzsprout ads and then I send them to
47.
my website and it doesn't work, does that mean
Mhm.
Buzzsprout ads is bad? No, because it could have been my
Mhm.
advertisement. It could have been the page I sent them to,
Okay.
or it could have been the ad. There's so many different parts, but when you kind of at least come up with a game plan of like, okay, I'm going to do a podcast that will position me to do blank. And
Mhm.
the podcast, the business, the blog, the YouTube channel is for people who want this. And then it's just a matter of I always go back to a restaurant. If I did a restaurant and came out and said, "Hey, here's my new top dish," I'd have somebody eat it and go, "What'd you think?" And they'd go, "It's a little too salty for me." Okay, that's
Mhm.
feedback. You go back, you come back out. What about now? And so, when you're starting your business, your blog, your YouTube channel, get some feedback. And then once you have to where people are like, can I have more of this? Are there any other videos that I could watch? That's
Right.
when you start
Mhm.
marketing.
Right. Yeah, but of course there's always going to be somebody that wants more salt, right? Todd?
That's true. You can't please
Yeah,
everybody.
right.
Mhm. And then
Yeah.
before closing this, because oh my God, already more than 1 hour, almost 1:30. It's about your clients, different clients, between both of you, Rob and also Dave. Like, let's go to the what is it, like, study case with your clients, Dave. Yeah, are how long does it take for them to have their podcast take off and monetized? And of course, different with Rob.
Well, I
With
always
your
tell people,
students on School of Podcasting.
yeah. Well, number one, it might take them a year. I just had somebody who signed up who's been
1 year.
listening to me for
Mm-hmm.
6 months.
Mm-hmm.
They've listened for 6 months and they just now joined. I had somebody else that listened
Mm-hmm.
for 9 months and joined. So it's not, I will put up a podcast and they will join. So there's that. And I always
Mm-hmm.
tell people, as always, with every podcast question, it depends. It depends on how niche your show is. It depends how much marketing budget you have. It depends on if you have a previous, some sort of previous audience. It depends on how comfortable you are making content. There are all those variables. And that's why I always tell people, unless you're, super talented and got something going on, plan on at least 3 years. And that's making extremely good content and marketing it in a smart way. And that's and the reason I do that, again, I have a clip I could play you that's just multiple people going, well, and then we started making money after about the 3rd year. And then somebody else will say, I was doing this thing and then it just took off. And somebody go, when was that? And they'll go 3 years. So I've just heard that answer enough to where that's my default answer. I'm like, if you want to do it in 2 and prove me wrong, please do and let me know. But when people go, I want to start a podcast, I want to start a YouTube channel and quit my job in 6 months, I'm like, I'm not going to say it's impossible. I'm just going to say it's really improbable. So,
yeah. And even if you go back to the earlier days of the podcasting medium, some of the biggest podcasters like a Mark Maron or a Joe Rogan, Adam Carolla, those guys, many of them podcasted for a year without really making any revenue from it. So it was more like something that they were trying to build, right? So they had to build an audience, and that took time. It doesn't happen overnight usually, unless you get a lot of marketing that drives it. It does help to be a celebrity. All 3 of those guys had some celebrity status, which propelled them in the early days. Like all 3 of those guys started back in 2009. So it isn't like all 3 of those guys are Johnny come latelys. They've been doing this podcasting thing for a very long time, and they've achieved large success, but it wasn't like it happened in a year. So, right.
And what is your focus, Rob? Because you are very good at helping your clients to do the branding for their podcasting and also for live streaming.
Well, really, as far as what I'm doing now is I'm really mostly a content creator now, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can right now because I want to be able to be an expert on the video side and be able to really get back in the groove of being really, I would say, the best content creator that I can be. And I did it for many years in the past, but I was working kind of, behind the scenes really in a lot of ways for many, many years. So I felt like I was falling behind a little bit about the new technologies. And I know Dave's done a terrific job of being always experimenting with new platforms and new ways of doing podcasting. And that's kind of a skill that I've been working on trying to develop too. And that's why I did this deal for a year with StreamYard, creating content on their platform using their tools was to continue learning and to get better.
Is there any plan to work it with a brand again? Maybe together with Dave in one company again.
I mean, if that opportunity comes up again, I would be okay with it. I would
Wow.
probably pursue it
I
again.
love to hear that. Yes.
It kind of depends on who it is and what they're all about. My goal is to remain at the cutting edge of this medium, and that's why I was very outspoken a year ago about what's happening with the development of video again. In the early part of my career, I worked at Microsoft and Xbox, and video podcasting was huge back then. So I come from an era when video podcasting was, maybe 30-40% of the podcast medium, and then it kind of faded away to some degree when YouTube started, and then we've seen this kind of shift back to the video side. So that's why I really invested in building out my home studio and getting studio lights and a higher quality camera, because I could see those trend lines starting to shift towards video again, and I wanted to be in a great place to be able to take advantage of that at some point to further my own work in the podcasting space to stay up with it. I know Dave did the same thing.
Yeah, it's my background's in teaching, and if you're not learning, you're going backwards. And so, in fact, I always feel like I'm like right now, I can play in AI tools like ChatGPT and Poe and a couple other ones, but I'm by no means a prompt engineer by any means, but I'm trying to stay on top of that because I really think that's going to be, a major
That's the
part of the
big thing.
future. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
and at first
even when I see that's true. But when I see you on the different side, like when you play the guitar or the bass like that, I thought that you were into jazz, Dave. But you mentioned that you were in the country before. So yeah,
no,
maybe my different image.
my big thing is rock. I've been a rock guy
Well,
and especially blues.
Yes.
I got into blues later, but I've played in just about everything. But I've played in a country band for a while. Again, trying to learn new stuff. And it's weird because on the guitar, it's kind of like the difference between English and French. It's the same alphabet, just the words are
Mhm.
mixed together completely different. So when I started playing country,
Yes.
I was like, wow, this is a totally different way of looking at the same instrument. So and I ended up playing violin parts and all sorts of weird stuff on the guitar. So I'm always the first job I had out of college, they had these giant banners everywhere that said constant improvement. And that's just been one of
Mhm.
my mantras every day because knowing how to program a fax machine isn't very handy right now. So I gotta, I gotta stay up on the tech.
right.
Does it influence your characteristic in your work in podcasting now? Because I see that Rob is very good working with the team because he was a basketballer.
Yeah.
He was in the basket.
Yeah, I'm definitely in more of an individual sport now.
Mhm.
So I spent a
That's
few years
true.
as a track and high jumper, so I know how to play an individual sport too. So that's kind of what my last year has
Yes.
been, really.
Yeah. Okay. Let's wrap up then because it's almost 1 hour and 30 minutes, and I know that you are very busy, but I feel honored to have you here again today, and then also opening the live podcast. Thank you so much for all of the support as always. On my way to to build the media branding in live podcast. Dave, do you have any last advice and how do the people able to contact you be able to contact you?
Yeah. You can find me over at schoolofpodcasting.com is my main website, or if you go to
Mhm.
powerofpodcasting.com, that has everything I do. And really for advice, so many people look at somebody who's really popular right now. Maybe they're like, "Oh, I could never be Joe Rogan, or I could never be,
Yes.
whoever." But think about, a couple years ago, one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game, Tom Brady, retired. And someday Joe Rogan's going to retire, and somebody's going to have to take his place. So if you start now, a few years from now, if you keep working on being better, you might actually be, you know, popular enough to, build an audience. And so, but if you,
Mm,
you don't have to be, there's an old Zig Ziglar quote, you don't have to be great to start, but you do have to start to be
mhm,
great. So we have a running gag at the School of Podcasting. We say nobody's going to punch you in the face because they're listening, far away. And so what's the worst thing that could happen? So hop on in
maybe
and
virtually by words that you slap the people. Like-
yeah, nobody's going to punch you in the face. So just,
You never know
hop
these
on in.
days.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
true.
Yes,
Yeah, ask Chris Rock. Yeah,
that's very funny.
yeah.
Yeah.
What about
Rob,
you, Rob?
Be good at ducking. That's
yeah.
that
Mm,
that's the important skill of today. So, right. Yeah, so I
Where
can be found at robgreenlee.com. I can also be found on X at Rob Greenlee, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of the normal social platforms. I'm out there. I do a couple of live shows every week. I do the New Media Show with Todd Cochran at newmediashow.com. I also do podcast tips with Rob Greenlee, and I also do another podcast called Spoken Life. So I'm actually following in Dave's footsteps of having many podcasts to my name. So it's just
yes.
over time, I picked these shows up, and I don't always update them every single week, but mostly the new media shows updated every week, but yeah, I try and keep them all updated as much as I can. But yeah, there's always something else to do out there.
Gentlemen, again, once more, it's an honor to have you here, and thank you so much for today to share all of the knowledge that uh, has been formulated maybe more than 15 years, 20 years, yes, Rob, and Dave in the podcasting. So
Yeah.
again, thank you so much for opening live podcast, and tomorrow we are going to go live streaming again at the same time, 5 p.m. Eastern New York time. And thank you so much for Arn Carden, expert in you, who sponsor live podcast so that I can make this event happening. Thank you so much,
Mhm.
and I'll see you soon again tomorrow. Thank you so much, Dave and Rob, for being here.
Yeah.